incredible coach.
Okay. Should have done this before I started recording. Jordan?
Here.
John?
Here.
Ben?
Chris on.
Casey?
Here.
Colin?
Here. Say here. Say here. Say here. He's looking down.
I can't hear when I've got my head down. Norman?
Stewart.
Jesse? Rob?
Here.
Dale? They're late, right? Gary? Haley? Max? Daniel? Sam?
I'd like to make riddle.
All right. So yesterday we began to talk about Logos. A few of you came up to me after class and said that you had learned some new things, so that's good. Again, this tool is got a lot to it. I don't expect you to remember every single thing that we talk about, but again, it's kind of like your Greek vocabulary. Practice. You know, when we go through some stuff during the day, go home that evening and find 15, 20 minutes and just tinker with this stuff. The more you do it and the more you play with it, the more you'll remember how. So we were looking at Philippians 1:1. So I don't know if you've played with your Logos before now or since class or whatever, but go to your home page, and in the home page Bible study box, just type in Philippians 1:1. And let's regenerate that report. It'll take a second. Now, mine this morning was trying to download a new update.
Mine did that too.
You might want to pause the download or cancel it for now. It'll do it later. When you cancel a download, it won't forget about it and never do it. But you probably don't want to do that in class, because what it's going to do is it's going to download that update, it's going to install it, and then it's going to probably re-index your library. So, which doesn't take very long. It's a small update, but better to just pause that or do it. If you're already re-indexing, just let it go. It shouldn't take very long. Okay, so we were talking about Philippians 1:1, and we had gone through the passage guide. What are the four main passage guides? Not passage guides. What are the four main guides that we concern ourselves with the most? Passage. Exegetical.
Topical.
No, topical and Bible word study. But topical, remember that the kind of in order. Passage, exegetical, and Bible word study. And then the fourth one would be topical. Okay? Again, passage deals with the whole passage. Exegetical deals with the components of the passage. Word deals with the individual words. Okay? So that's really kind of the study approach that we tend to take. So we were looking at Philippians 1:1, and we were looking at this biblical people report. And again, what the biblical people report does is it looks to see if there are any names or references to individuals or groups of people in the passage, and if there is, it tries to give you a report. And so we had mentioned that we've got Timothy, for example, and I think we had looked a little bit at Timothy. You see all of these family trees and all of these people there. These are all have some connection to Timothy. Now, the further down the road you get, the more obscure the reference to Timothy may be, but they all have some connection to Timothy. And as I mentioned, and I think where we left off, you'll notice all these cross-references. And if you click the little ellipsis at the end of that list, you're going to get all these cross-references. All of these references, in some way or another, are related to Timothy. They either mention him by name, or there's a pronoun that represents him in the verse somewhere. So you've got all of these references to this person. If you wanted to study Timothy more deeply, what would you do?
Probably just type Timothy himself in.
Just click on his name.
Yep.
And that's going to bring up a biblical, what they call now the fact book. I'm going to go ahead and float this panel so you can see it. That's going to bring up the fact book. It's going to bring up his family trees again. It's going to bring up maps. But it's also going to bring up all of this other information about Timothy. And again, this is kind of new the last couple of versions. They've tweaked this into this fact book. The fact book becomes kind of your encyclopedia for the topic or person or city or whatever it is that you're studying. And it's kind of like looking it up in a biblical dictionary or a biblical encyclopedia. You just have all of these events or dictionary articles or ways that this individual is referred to as. This report changes depending on whether you're looking at a person, a place, an object, and that kind of thing. So we'll look more at this as time goes along. But look at all this information, all of these dictionary articles on Timothy. Again, your librarian has been very busy. She's kind of tried to read your mind and say, look, if you were looking at Philippians 1:1, you might want to do some research on Timothy. So I may as well get those books ready for you. You follow? So as you scroll through here, you're going to find Paul. And notice at the bottom it says, Paul, Jesus, show all. What this is saying is there wasn't enough room in this panel to show all of the people, all the biblical people in this report. So if you just click show all, it's going to expand this further. And now as you scroll down, you have a listing for Paul. And as you scroll down, you have a listing for Jesus. And so on. Hey.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I know the roads are nasty.
RTD bus ran into a Honda Civic.
A what?
An RTD bus ran into a Honda Civic. Yeah. It looked
Crunch it bad?
Yes.
Yeah, usually the little cars don't win over big things.
No, they don't.
So, hopefully everybody was okay.
Looked like they were.
So, again, you click on Paul, you get a fact book on Paul, and you can do all kinds of research on him. But notice the little ellipsis. If I click the little ellipsis, look at how many passages in the New Testament refer to Paul.
It's not too much.
So,
I'm surprised that it's not more.
yeah. I mean, that's quite a, I mean, it's pretty small, but that's quite a few. But yeah, you would think, I don't know how many that is, but it's a lot. Now, one of the reasons why this report slowed down a little bit is you'll notice that Jesus is in here, and there's an ellipsis for Jesus.
Oh, man. Yeah, I figured that one was going to be really long.
There you go.
That's what Rob was looking for. I'm still scrolling. Okay? So those are all the references. But, I mean, okay.
Bible must be about Jesus.
Yeah, the Bible must be about Jesus. Now, think about this for just a second. And well, if we understand computers and we understand what computers are really good at, it shouldn't be a surprise to us, but sometimes it kind of is. This is every reference to Jesus in the New Testament in some way or another. Now, there are some of these that will just refer to him as he. What Logos has done over the last few years is they've gone through and, one of the limitations before in the past, when we used to walk uphill in the snow both directions, was if you wanted to find every reference to Jesus, well, you could search for his name. I mean, you could search for Jesus. You could search for Christ. But what about all of those passages that he bore our sins on the cross? What do you do with that? Well, it used to be some of the translations would capitalize the pronouns. So you could search for all of the capital he's and hims. But sometimes that he or him referred to God, not Jesus directly. So you had to sort through that. There was really no way to do that. Well, since then, they have gone through and looked at every pronoun. Now, they did this manually. They created this database. And sometimes, every now and then, I find one that's wrong, and you can send them a bug report and they'll fix it. But they went through the text manually and said, okay, here's a pronoun. Who's included in this pronoun? And in the background, in the metadata for that word, and in the structure of these books, they included all that information. So if the pronoun is we, and it includes Luke and Peter, if you did a biblical people report for Peter, that we pronoun would show up. That reference to we would show up, which is kind of cool. it's not kind of cool. It is cool. It really does give us an opportunity now to see every place that an individual is referenced, not just by their name, but when they talk about him using a pronoun. So that's one of the things that's happening here with Jesus, is you've got all of these references. Now, not all of them have the name Jesus in them, but some of them would have he did this or he did that, and they know from the context that it's talking about Jesus, so they put all of that in. Now, one of the things that's kind of interesting is if we did a fact book report on Jesus, we just clicked on Jesus, and again, I'll float the panel so that, give it a second. See these little bars? See these little square dots that always means your librarian is busy doing something for you, okay? So you always have to give it a second. But it basically searched through all of my media and found references to Jesus. Now, notice, if we scroll down, how he's referred to. He's referred to with a pronoun 2,900 times. So if you were just searching for Jesus by his name, you would have found 624 references to his name, but you would have missed 2,900 references to him using some kind of a pronoun. So you can see how much more efficient this is. You also see the word Lord, Christ, the occurrences of Jesus Christ together, the occurrences of Christ Jesus. Now, I'm going to plant a little bug in your head, and you can deal with this on your own. Are there times when it's intentional that he's referred to Christ Jesus instead of Jesus Christ? And if so, why? Why did the author choose Christ Jesus instead of Jesus Christ? And we know that Christ isn't his last name, right? Because I think sometimes we kind of act like it is. His first name is Jesus, his last name is Christ. Like, I'm Michael Hite, and he was Jesus Christ. No, it doesn't work that way. So why would some authors, 89 times he's referred to as Christ Jesus, 97 times he's referred to as Jesus Christ. Is there a reason in some contexts as to why that would happen? Son of Man, Son, our Lord Jesus, and more. He's referred to as Light, King of the Jews, Savior, Jesus of Nazareth, Rabbi, Child, Son of David, High Priest, His Own, Master, and One. So there's all kinds of ways that Jesus is referred to, and they're all there for you to look at. Pretty neat. Now, the other thing that happens in these reports, and this is not really new, but it's new at how they've done it. When you look at a biblical person, it also tries to look for media in your library. Now, what media is you do have some resources that are just pictures and that kind of thing, maps and that kind of stuff. But you also have books that have illustrations in them. I'm going to go ahead and close this for just a second. Notice, for example, here about Paul, I've got maps, but I've also got like drawings, like this particular drawing. If I click on it, you'll notice that this drawing is in a resource. And if I look at the information box, this is a resource called The Bible and Its Stories. And it's a collection of images that I have in my library. You may or may not have it. But it's a drawing of Paul. Now, I can make it larger by floating the panel. I can also zoom into it. The neat thing about these resources, these media resources, is if I right-click on it, you'll notice I can do a copy. I can save the image out to just my computer. I can use visual copy, which we've mentioned we haven't really played with yet. I can also send it to Keynote. If you're on the PC, it probably says send to PowerPoint. So I can copy this graphic out and put it in a PowerPoint if I wanted to, a Keynote presentation right now, or I could print it. So these media resources can become pretty cool. And again, what your librarian did is your librarian went through all of your books and said, are there any drawings or charts or graphs that are related to Paul? in one way or another. Now, sometimes how they're related is kind of a stretch. For example, was Paul ever in Caesarea? That was meant to be answered, right? Paul was in Caesarea. So if there's a coin from Caesarea in your database somewhere, it might show it. Okay. So what's the connection with Paul? Well, he was in Caesarea one time, and so this is what the coin. Yeah, he probably used a coin. So this is kind of what it looked like. But you got some neat stuff here to explore. This is a portrait of Peter and Paul, and it's a drawing of a coin. Looks like it was actually from it was found in the catacombs, and it was on a glass cup containing Jesus and Peter and Paul. So little thing, but see, this is just in the middle of an article somewhere in one of your books in Smith's Bible Dictionary, but your librarian found it because it's related to Paul. So again, do you see the power of what your librarian is trying to do for you? All right, so that's biblical people. We'll play with that a little bit more later, but you also, if I collapse that, you have biblical places. Now, in this particular case, we should see Philippi because Philippians 1:1 mentions the city of Philippi, right? To all the saints in Christ Jesus who are in Philippi. So now, instead of doing people, we have all of this connection to Philippi. And again, it's done all of these media resources, and it's searched for all this stuff. Here's a Philippian coin. And Mac users, floating a panel is Command Option F. And so if you learn that shortcut, it comes in easy. And then all I'm doing to make it large or small is I'm pinching on my touchpad. If you have a trackpad on your PC, sometimes it's how you scroll a scroll wheel. So if you just move your finger on, that should zoom in and zoom out. But on the Mac, you can just pinch. It's almost like you're holding a coin. But this is a coin from Alexander the Great that was connected to Philippi, and you can kind of see what those coins look like, which is kind of neat. You've got photos, you've got maps, you've got all kinds of stuff. Now, when you get to maps, what it's doing is it's showing you, again, maps that are in books that you own. But you also have charts like this. Now, this is still all the Tyndale Bible Dictionary. We'll see some other charts later. But this is all from Tyndale's Bible Dictionary, and you have all these maps. And again, I could float the panels and zoom in on them and all of that kind of stuff. If I click on Philippi, what's it going to do?
Bring up the fact book.
Right. It's going to bring up a fact book on Philippi. And again, I'll float the panel so that we can see it a little bit easier. Now here, some of these maps are going to be the interactive maps that are part of the Logos library. So if I click on this first one, you'll notice it opened an atlas. You remember in our tools we talked about atlas. And so it opens the interactive atlas for Philippi. Now it's telling me I'm having a hard time with the internet. Let me switch to the classroom internet. That should speed up some.
Hey, Michael?
Yeah?
How do you get it to pop up in that big individual screen like that?
In here? It should do it automatically. It was saying it was having a hard time getting to the internet.
No, I'm saying the whole atlas.
Or float the screen.
Oh, float the panel.
Control F11.
So you click on.
You'll click on your whatever it is that you're wanting to do, and you'll do Control F11, and it'll pop it up.
Did you get it? Now, I mean, all you should have to do is just double click on the map itself in the fact book, and it should replace the fact book panel with your map panel. Did you see what I did?
Yeah. Yeah, I just clicked on it once and it popped up.
Okay. Yeah, I'm never sure if you. When in doubt, double click. But yeah. So you're here now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you can make this panel bigger. I'm going to make it a little bit larger. This first map was about Paul moving from Troas to Philippi, right? And so again, using your finger, you can move around the map. You can move the map around. You can pinch and zoom, or you can use your scroll wheel, scrolling up and down to zoom in on the map. One of the other cool things about maps in Logos, and scrolling in and out tends to be kind of sensitive. You got to really kind of be gentle with it. But if I wanted to go from, for example, if I wanted to figure out how far it was, let me try to get it a little closer there. If I wanted to figure out how far it was from Troas to Philippi, I can point at Troas, and if I hold down the command key, I think it's the control key on PC, and click and drag, see this circle that comes out? Now I can actually drag all the way over to Philippi, and it told me it was about 131 miles. Roughly, 131, okay? So that's kind of cool. Now, understand that these distances are approximated. I mean, you're looking at, but it's about 130 miles. Don't say in a Bible class, it's exactly 131.83 miles it's not. You'd have to zoom in and you'd have to do all kinds of things to have it be more accurate. But you can see that you can measure things on these maps, and these maps tend to be more interactive than normal. So I'm not sure why it's still it's having a hard time. You can also go full screen at the top of the atlas. You can either fit the map in the window, or you can take the map full screen and it'll take up your entire computer screen that way. You can look at terrain, or you can look at a flat map. So flat maps are exactly what you might think. They lack much detail, but you can look at a terrain map too, which tries to kind of show you where the mountain ranges are, where the valleys are, and that kind of stuff a little bit more. I leave mine on terrain. I really don't find much reason not to. I'm going to close that for just a second and go back to my fact book. Now, also notice in this right-hand side, left-hand side column, you have all this information about Philippi. You have a basic definition. You can do a media search. You have these various maps that are related to Philippi. Boy, the internet's giving me grief. Is it giving? No, I guess it's just taking a second. These various maps. Now, one of the challenges with maps is sometimes you click on one and you're like, okay, why did it bring up this map? Well, because Philippi is on the map somewhere. Like, for example, the early church biblical world, my guess is this is going to be a pretty wide map. Let's see what it does. Yeah. Guess what? Philippi is in there somewhere. Now, if you don't know where, you may have a hard time finding it, but you can zoom in, and as you zoom in, you might be able to find it. So the ones closer to the top of the list tend to be more relative to what you're looking for than ones further down on the list. As you move further down on these lists, you get more obscure connections to the topic that you're looking at in the fact book. There's still a connection. I mean, Philippi is on this list, on this map, but it's not labeled on the map. So you would have to do more work to find it and to zoom in and to do all of that kind of stuff. So if I zoomed in, I could eventually find Philippi. But the one at the top is going to most likely mark Philippi, and you notice it even did the little thing to show you, here's where Philippi is, okay? Now you also have, you can go back to the fact book on Philippi just by clicking fact book, and it'll take you back to Philippi. And then you've got all of these events that are related to Philippi. You've got all the dictionary articles, how it's referenced, the Greek, other library resources, all kinds of information about Philippi in the fact book. So the maps in Logos have really been improved a great deal, especially with the interactive ability to measure distances and look at how these things interact. You can also copy those maps to PowerPoint as well. I didn't show you that, but like right now, if I wanted to, if I right-click on this map, I have the same choices that I had before. Now, it's telling me it's having a hard time with the internet, so I'm not sure how good this is going to work, but I want to show you something that's kind of neat in these maps while we're here. Instead of Philippi, I'm going to type in Jericho. And I want the Old Testament city of Jericho. Give the map a second. And I can zoom in on Jericho here. And I can zoom right into where the city of Jericho was. Give it a second to refresh. But one of the neat things you can do is you can right-click on this and say Open Google Maps. Now, if my internet connection is decent, which it may or may not be, you'll notice it opened up Google to
A modern map.
a modern map of where Jericho is. And if I zoom in on Jericho, I can look at a terrain map on Jericho. I can get directions to drive to Jericho. But you can they've changed this interface. I'm not sure why this is doing this. Huh. My resolution for this computer, for this screen is lower. But you should be able to actually get to today's aerial photograph from Google. And I don't seem to be able to get to it without it all being covered up by 8 million other things. So it really lacks its impressiveness. But you can actually look at an aerial photograph and see the tell in Jericho where the original Jericho was. If you jump to Google and zoom in, you can actually see where the old city of Jericho was, where they've done all the excavations. The other day, Dave in chapel, in his chapel presentation, mentioned Garstang and Kathleen Kenyon and all of that, pottery and stuff. Well, you can actually see the mound that was the original city of Jericho. And you can see what it looks like today from an aerial photograph. So that's kind of cool that you can look at these locations and then connect them to where they are in the real world today. So I'll play with that and see if I can't figure out. They changed it. You used to just have a little button that said, show this on Google, and it would bring up a Google map and do all that kind of stuff. But
So you had to right-click it this time, right?
yeah, this time you had to right-click on the map, and it says Open Bing Maps or Open Google Maps. But you used to be able to do it, right from the fact book. And I don't see that Google location anymore. it used to show you the coordinates, and you just clicked on the coordinates, and it would zoom a Google map right in to what you were looking at. So, looks like they've changed that a little bit. All right, so I'm going to close that. So I'm back into my biblical places. So you've got all kinds of information about Philippi. Biblical things is the next one, and I don't know that there's not going to be a result for biblical things. Biblical things are objects. So if the verse mentions a sword, or if you're looking at David and Goliath, for example, and it's talking about his armor, it'll bring up graphics about armor and even comparing Goliath's size to Shaquille O'Neal and all this kind of stuff. It's kind of neat. This particular verse, Philippians 1:1, doesn't have any objects. So we'll look at how to use the fact book to do that at another time. And then biblical events is relatively new as well. This verse does not mention an event, so there's nothing in there, but we will look at those as we move along. Media resources is just looking for any media that might have a connection to the people or the places or the events of this verse. And so it's going to go through your entire library. Now this is where I struggle very mightily with how this media resources report gives you information. For example, if I look at this graphic, I'm not going to click and open it, but it's in one of my books, and it says it's the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. Now I'm studying Philippians 1:1. Why is it showing me the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem?
No idea.
Think it through.
Doesn't he mention Christ in his...
Right. Jesus is mentioned in the verse. Jesus is connected to the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. Therefore, it sees a connection. But sometimes the connection is, okay, the Garden of Gethsemane. Now, if I'm looking at Philippians 1:1, am I thinking about the garden here? I mean, is that relative to Paul's letter to the Philippians? No, but since Jesus is mentioned in this first verse, and Jesus is connected to the garden, here's a photograph of the Garden of Gethsemane. Do you see what it's doing? I want you to understand why these resources are there. Sometimes that gets really kind of foolish in my mind. It just connects you to too many things that are obscure. This is kind of like all the cross-references in the margin of your Bible. Some of them are very relevant. Some of them are not. Okay, so music. You may or may not have some books in your library. Usually they're little hymnals or they're books on hymns. And if there is something related to this verse, then it'll bring up what songs. Now, for song leaders, that can be kind of cool. If you are putting together a sermon and you want to see if there are any songs related to your pericope, you could look under music and you could maybe say, hey, these 3 songs are kind of relevant to, my sermon topic, at least the passage that I'm talking about, and you could give them to your song leader to think about. Yeah.
Sort of off topic, but is there, within Logos, is there song list?
No, you have books that contain hymns or about hymns,
Gotcha.
if you have any in your library.
All right.
Again, it depends on your library. But again, understand what Logos is doing for the most part is it's using books to do these reports. So your librarian looks at all of your library and says, is there a list of songs somewhere? If there is in one of the books, there may be a way to pull up that list. But Logos isn't just going to have a list of songs unless you have a book in your library. This is an interface into your digital library. Do we follow kind of how that works? Okay. So if you have hymnals, you would be able to look for songs. If you don't have any hymnals in your library, you won't. Okay, topics is next. And what it's trying to do is it's trying to break down topics that are related to this passage. Now, one of the interesting things is that it sees that servant is probably the greatest topic related to this. Why?
Just because it's bigger?
Well, because,
Okay, yes, visually in this word cloud, because it's larger. But you'll see in the list, servant is first. Why is it saying servant is a topic related to Philippians 1:1?
because of the word bondservant?
Yeah, you've got that word bondservant. So it's kind of looking at this passage and seeing the major words. You'll notice you've got elder, you've got bishop, you've got servant, you've got slave, saint, but then you also have overseer, you've got epistle to the Philippians, you've got all kinds of little deaconesses, you've got Phoebe, you got all kinds of subjects that might be related. Now, let's talk about this little cloud thing, whatever this is. And Logos is going to get mad at me if they ever see this. But when they first came up with these word clouds, they did it in a report called Interesting Words. And initially, it really didn't seem to have any bearing on how big the word was or what direction it went as to how important it was. To their credit, they have tried to make this more visual. And they have tried to say, based on size of these words, how important these words are to the verse that you're looking at. For example, servant is one of the largest words here. And so you've got the words like bondservant, overseer, deacons. All of those would be related to that servant kind of concept. And so that they're trying to tell you that's in the middle, that's one of the largest ones, that's probably a significant topic. Do you see what they're doing? Now you can look at this topic list a number of ways. You can look at it right now, the default is this cloud. You can also look at it by tags. And that just brings up this interesting list to try to show you what's important. You can also just look at it by a list of topics.
What happened to the topic of Christ?
Well,
Just curious as to why I asked that.
yeah.
Based on Philippians 1:1. So we're assuming it's something.
Yeah. It's a good question.
Consider he's mentioned twice there in that.
Yeah. It's a very good question. Now, this is one of the reasons that I have not been excited about this topical report. First of all, as an exegete, you should be able to break down these passages and determine what's important in these passages, right? So you don't really need this report, but the fact that they're trying to tell you what they see as important is still an opinion that they express. And I don't know what algorithms they're using. I don't know what math they're trying to do. It is generated from the report, so this isn't a list that they came up with. Their algorithm is looking at this passage and trying to figure it out. But I find this report sometimes frustrating and limited. Okay. Now the one advantage of this report is that it connects you to a topic guide. If you notice at the bottom here, you've got the topic guide, servant. So if you click servant, you do get a topic guide, and we haven't talked about the topic guide yet. We'll talk about that more later. I'll float it for just a second. But now you're doing a search for the topic of servant. So you're going to see all kinds of encyclopedia articles, dictionary articles, related verses, illustrations that talk about servant, media resources about servants. You've got all kinds of information, and then lots of books that they can sell you that'll teach you more about servants. So topic guide can become important once you determine what the topic is. I just don't think you need this report on topics to tell you what topics are in Philippians 1:1. You follow? I mean, we should be smart enough to read Philippians 1:1 and say, what are the topics here?
The topic guide, how does that differ, let's say with the word servant or bondservant, then if you, in your 4 panels there, your information guide, if you click on bondservant,
Okay, what the information box is doing is it's just looking up definitions and stuff from certain resources, not all resources.
Oh, okay.
So, and there are ways to control what books and things are used in the information panel. We haven't done that yet, but you can determine what books it looks at. For example, you could set up the information window to always look at the TDNT article for whatever words you click on.
Oh,
Topic guide is going to search all of your dictionaries, all of your lexicon, all of that
got
stuff.
it.
Your librarian does a lot more work in the topic guide than the information box does. Okay, so you got topics, you got illustrations. This is another tool that I don't find particularly useful. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But you have a number of books in your library that come with your core library on illustrations. Now, the problem with books on, what do you think the problem is with books on illustrations?
Is it because there's just artists' opinions of things?
Sometimes they are. But I mean, we have a bunch of books in our library on these illustrations, right? 1,001 biblical illustrations and that kind of stuff. If you've ever looked at them, what's the problem with using them?
They get outdated real fast.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to talk about something that happened in World War II to a little boy in a grocery store, and I mean, they just seem outdated. Again, if you want to learn how to do illustrations for your reports and your classes and your sermons, watch Neil Pollard. Neil is one of the best I've ever seen at finding I think it was last Sunday or the Sunday before, there's a guy in Norway that one time did, and it was relevant to what he was explaining, and it's like, how on earth did he find this story of the guy in Norway? Well, he didn't find it in this report, I guarantee you. Now, there are some cool things to look at from time to time, but, you're looking at some pretty old resources at times, and depending on the size of your library, you may find the number of illustrations available interesting. For example, Bishop is one of, well, let's not use Bishop. Let's look at church. Church is one of the topics. So attending church is one of the illustrations. So you look at it, and an old farmer attending Sunday school conference commented, I find it amusing, all those papers and discussions on how to get people to come to the meetings. I have never heard a single address at a farmer's convention on how to get the cattle to come to the rack. It's simple. We just use the best kind of feed. Now, are you going to use that illustration in your Bible class or your sermon? Talking about, how we should be getting more people to come. There was a farmer one time, they just lack currentness sometimes. So, again, you may find some things in here every now and then. A blind squirrel finds an acorn every now and then, right? But I don't often find these books very relevant because they tend to be older books, yes.
So it's searching through all of the versions you've got within your...
Yeah, it's looking through all your books on illustration. You'll notice all of these books are books on illustration. I have one called 1,000 Illustrations for Preaching and Teaching. I have another one that's just called Illustrations for Biblical Preaching, and it's looking through all of those.
I wasn't necessarily meaning the illustrations. I was meaning, for instance, the words that they are pulling the illustrations from, like bishop. Because you got NASB.
That list is going to be very similar to the list in topics.
But even that, they're pulling that through all the, say, King James, NIV, all that stuff you've got within your logos. Because bishop is not in.
Right. Well, yeah, it is. Overseer, same word.
Right, but it's not.
It's translated bishop, so
Yeah.
they do know what those additional words are sometimes referred to, so they would give you that as well. Your librarian's pretty smart. She knows that word overseer sometimes is used bishop, and so she's going to say there's some illustrations on bishop. Now, again, that's not a term that we use, but it's trying to figure out from this verse what illustrations might be relevant. For example, letters. This doesn't say anything about a letter. The word letter is not in Philippians 1:1. but your librarian knows that Philippians is a letter, so there are illustrations about letters. Do you follow? So your librarian's pretty sharp. I mean, she or it or whatever you want to call it, it kind of has a sense of what kind of book you're looking at and what might be relevant. But there are times when she's just so interested in collecting everything that she can find that some things aren't as relevant as you might want them to be. You know, she's looking at some more obscure connections that you maybe don't think are as relevant. Make sense? All right. So we've got illustrations, interesting words I'm not even going to deal with. Again, this one frustrates me because it's this idea of let me show you what the interesting words are. As an exegete, you should know what the interesting words are. The only cool thing here is that you can change this to Greek, and it's going to show you in Greek. I'm also going to show you how to turn some of these off. Compare versions. Compare versions is another one that I find challenging. And so far, and maybe through recording this and putting it online, somebody will send me an email that will, for the first time in the history of Logos, be able to explain to me what we're looking at with this compare versions graphic. Because right now, I got no clue. What this is attempting to do, by the best understanding that I have, is visually present the differences between these various versions. Now, you remember this text comparison window panel over here that we talked about? And if you float this panel, it shows you this percentage of difference and all of that, right? I mean, well, this is supposed to be visually representing that in some way, shape, or form. So here's your New American Standard, and the New King James is way up here. Now, depending on what class I am, I've had guys say, well, I can explain it. The New King James is better, so it's higher than the New American Standard, and the NIV is a horrible translation, so it's lower. Well, that's not what they're trying to do, trust me. But they are trying to show a distance between your version, New American Standard, and other versions. What that means, I have no clue. I turn them on. So if anybody out there can explain this to me, explain it to me. I'd be happy to understand it better. Sermons. There are a few that we're going to get to now that I'm going to caution you on. Luckily, at this point, there's no results. As you develop sermons using the Sermon Starter Guide, you would see sermons in this list, but we're going to hit a number of websites here at the bottom of this report that I feel strongly that you need to be very, very careful with. One of the things that Logos is really trying to do is create more of a community. As a result, there are websites that they've developed that you can share sermon outlines and that kind of stuff. What is my concern with that?
The other people haven't done their due diligence, and they're off color, or they're liberal, or they're not exactly right. They're not exegetes. They haven't done plagiarism.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, plagiarism could be a biggie, right? You do have the problem of, okay, I don't have a sermon yet. Saturday night, jump on one of these websites, grab somebody's sermon outline, and go, right? And while you maybe only intended to do that once, next week is pretty busy too. I can always go here Friday night and grab a sermon, right? And my intention is to tweak it. I mean, I'll make it my own. I'll rearrange point 2 and 3, or something to make it mine. But it can really become a lazy man's tool. So be careful of these websites where you share sermons and sermon outlines. The other thing, and Jordan tried to say it as politely and gently as possible, but the reality is the vast majority of people that use this tool would not be New Testament Christians. So while they may be slightly off, some of them may be flat out false teaching. I mean, and if you're not careful about what you grab and you don't discern those differences because you're in a rush, you could have some real problems. Okay, so be very careful with these websites. Now, here's the other side of these websites. If we as New Testament Christians are teaching Scripture the way Scripture should be taught, we're doing our exegetical work, we're presenting the truth the way it was written. If we put our sermon outlines on those websites, is there a chance that some other guy may learn something from something we put up there? Yes. So I think it's a great push the information out tool. If you want to post your sermons on some of these websites, and it's easy to do through this tool, I suggest you do it. Because you never know who you might teach. Somebody may grab your sermon thinking, well, this is just another sermon from it, and as they read through, go, wow, I don't know that I really ever recognized that, Romans 6 was really saying that. You might sow a seed with somebody. Who knows? So, but be careful. The preacher's life becomes pretty chaotic at times. You get very busy. You're challenged to keep your schedule tight, and as a result, you may be tempted to cut corners. Sometimes cutting those corners can really get you in a lot of trouble. I certainly know more than one preacher who's been fired for taking most of his sermon outlines off of the internet rather than doing the work himself. So it's an easy trap to fall into to keep the schedule going, and you've got to be careful with that. The next one is Atlas, and we've already looked at Atlas from another connection. Now, I find it interesting that this Atlas has no results when it mentions Philippi, but my Atlas shows no results. So, bookstore is a place you can buy more books. GracewayMedia.com is a website you can subscribe to. You can pay money to get illustrations and get visuals for PowerPoints and that kind of stuff. SermonAudio.com is a place to share audio files. Sermons.logos.com is a place where you can share your sermon outlines. You can also find sermon outlines based on a passage that you're looking at. And then SermonCentral.com is similar. I often turn those last four off. First of all, Graceway Media is expensive. Second of all, I don't think it teaches you particularly good habits with PowerPoint. We're going to talk about PowerPoint in this class later on. So I don't find a whole lot of value there. But the sermons websites, I usually just turn those off from these reports because I don't use them. So that's the passage guide. Again, you can drag and drop these anywhere you want, and you can rearrange them. Now, the basic one, the passage guide by itself, is always going to generate itself the same way. It's going to use all of these tools. It's always going to do it. I'm going to show you, before we're done here, how to create your own passage guide that turns some of these off and on, and how to get Logos to use your passage guide instead of the default. But you remember the other day I moved commentaries around, and commentaries was back up at the top of this list. Why? Because I regenerated this report from the home page, and it used the default passage guide. Okay? The second, any questions about the passage guide? It's going to just take playing with some things from time to time and clicking on those reports and seeing what's relevant. Yeah?
So I don't have compare versions, so it must be turned off somewhere.
Okay, right up here, you have add, and compare versions is probably going to be in that list. Now, does yours say passage guide, or does yours say my passage guide at the top?
Passage guide.
Passage guide.
John's does too? Yours says yours says passage guide, not my passage guide?
Passage guide.
Okay. But yeah, that was the thing, is it was turned off. This add button shows you all of the reports that are available. The ones that are not turned on right now, the ones that are grayed out are already part of this report. The ones that are black are actually part of the exegetical guide. Now you can amass them all into one guide, but this is, if you turn things off and on, this is where you can turn them back off and back on.
I don't have compare versions.
You don't have compare versions at all?
Reflections, commentaries, cross-references, culture
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah, Haley.
I like I read it anyway.
Yeah, it's this particular place. It's not very useful.
I know we don't really know what compare versions does, but is there any reason that mine would look totally different than yours?
In compare versions.
Yeah.
Yeah, mine look different than yours too.
Yeah, mine have different colors.
Like I have the NASB on the top, and
Right.
it does not make a weird diamond. It makes like a triangle.
Yeah. So you've got different versions in there in different locations. The reason is because mine is currently set to top Bibles, and I have customized what Logos understands to be my top Bibles.
Okay.
So yours are going to be different. You probably have completely different versions here. And later on, when we get to library management, I'm going to show you how to create a collection called Top Bibles. And then this report would use those versions.
Okay.
But that's why. Okay, so any basic other questions about Passage Guide? There's some very cool tools in here. But again, there are some that aren't so much. And so you can go through like interesting words, I turn off, illustrations, I turn off, compare versions, I turn off, sermons, I turn off, bookstore, I turn off, grace, all of these last ones. Topics I don't use, music I don't use. Media resources I can get to from other reports, so I usually turn those off. Now you can see that just by turning all of those off, this report is much more manageable. I've got a smaller collection of reports that I would actually look at. Now, if I go to my home page, I'm going to try this, and I go to 1 Peter 1:1 for my verse instead. Let's see if it allowed me to leave them turned off. Because it's still on. It's still thinking. Never mind. Just a sec. Yeah. See, as soon as I regenerated it from the home page, it turned all of those things back on. So it's always doing the Passage Guide the same way when you start from your home page. All right, so I'm going to go back to Philippians 1:1 so that we can. So questions about the Passage Guide? Yes.
So if you click on Add, it shows you what's in the Passage Guide.
It shows you anything that's not currently visible. So in this case, what it's doing is all of the gray ones are the ones that are currently visible. And all of the black ones are the ones that aren't visible, but initially, the reason they're black is they're actually part of the exegetical guide, not the Passage Guide. You could add them to the Passage Guide and try to do everything in one guide. And you can also create, like I said, we're going to create these custom guides that are all your own, where you maybe blend the best of the Passage Guides and the exegetical guide into your own guide. That only uses the reports that you find the most useful. All right, so Passage Guide has dealt with the verse at 10,000 feet. What are the general concepts? What are some connections? Where are the outlines for the books? Do I have any journal articles? What are my cross references? All of those things that deal with the passage that you're looking at as a big chunk, right? If we click on the tab for the exegetical guide, now we're going to see a very different setup. And I have a number of things turned off probably. So if you have something that's not on my exegetical guide, let me know and we'll talk about it. It starts out, again, just like the Passage Guide. You can title this and save this exegetical guide. When I first got Logos, I thought, oh, that's really cool. I'll do this a lot. I've never gone back and looked at those because it's so easy to just regenerate the report for the verse that I'm looking at. So I've never really found a good reason to save these guides, but you can by saving. So the first one I have is textual variants. What's the first one you all have?
Textual variant.
Okay, textual variance. What is a textual variant? Good.
Well, kind of like what it sounds, really. I mean,
Yeah.
the word variant.
Yeah, and what does variant mean?
Differences, changes. I
Yeah.
don't know.
For example, there are times when there are passages, the end of the Gospel of Mark, right? We have a section at the end of the Gospel of Mark that is questionable as to its source, whether it should be in or shouldn't be in. A lot of times if you use a New American Standard, you'll get a footnote that says this is not included in early manuscripts and that kind of stuff. Those are all textual variants. Those are some passages that we aren't sure they belong where they are, or there's a phrase that's changed, or the Bible has a number of textual variants. Now, since I'm talking to freshmen, I need to not go too far. Variants are sophomores, sorry. Variants are not something that we should be overly freaked out by. We know they exist. 99.9% of them have nothing to do with doctrinal issues. They have to do with location in the text. When you go through How We Got the Bible, Gary and Jess, have you had How We Got the Bible?
Yes.
So Dan spends a lot of time talking about textual variants and the transmission of the text. So you guys will have a whole class on that. In your Greek New Testament, when you buy one for Greek class, do you guys all have one? Are you guys all using it?
No, we're not using it yet, but
You don't
Okay.
have to have it till Greek 3.
Okay. The bottom of your Greek New Testament should have something in it called an apparatus. An apparatus shows you these textual variants and then classifies them and talks about what manuscripts the variants are found in and which manuscripts don't have it and all. I mean, it gives you all this cool information. Well, that's what this section is this section is an apparatus. It basically is going to tell you what, based on books that you have, what variants exist in your passage, if any. Okay? So this is probably a more advanced topic, but I want you to know that it's there. Grammars are the next one for me. Is grammars next for you?
Yep.
Okay. If you don't have grammars, you probably don't have any grammar books. But if you have Greek and Hebrew grammars, and a grammar is just a book that explains the language, then you're going to get information in this box that shows you some particularly interesting things about your passage grammatically. Again, this tends to be much more advanced Greek than you will get going through Greek 1, 2, and 3. But as you progress in your knowledge of Greek, this can be a good source of information. Again, this is not beginner's material. This is more advanced than you probably are going to have even after you finish Greek 3. So, but just know that it's there. Visualizations. Visualizations deal with what are being called syntactically analyzed texts. Now, this is another high-end concept that we're not going to spend a lot of time in this class talking about, because like Scott Johnson, you will all go. And there are times when dealing with syntax, my head goes. But when we talk about, okay, you guys have had Greek 1?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So nominative nouns are what, typically?
The subject.
Subjects. Now, we tend to deal with them as nominative nouns, right? We look at the Greek morphology. But they function in the sentence as a subject. What syntax allows you to do is syntax allows you to break a passage down by its grammatical components, not its morphological components. So what do I mean by that? What is the subject of this passage? And what are all the direct objects related to this subject? Do you follow the difference? Now, in Greek, what morphological form often functions as a direct object?
Genitive.
Okay.
Direct object is accusative.
Accusative.
Direct object is accusative. So we could look for all the accusatives and do something similar. But we also need to say grammatically what other things are acting as a direct object. So syntax lets you really break all that down. That's about as far as we're going to go in that conversation. I'm going to show you some cool things later on using these tools that won't be as confusing. But for example, one of the things you could do with syntax is there are a number of passages in the New Testament that say to do something in the name of Jesus Christ, right? We're told to be baptized in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. We're told to call on the name of Jesus, right? There's a prepositional phrase, on the name of, call on the name of, or whatever. Wouldn't it be cool to find all of the verbs in the New Testament that are related to the prepositional phrase, the name of Jesus? So, calling on the name of the Lord, praising the name of the Lord, finding out all those things we're supposed to do in the name of the Lord. Well, you can't do that morphologically. I mean, trying to search by Greek morphological form, searching for nominative nouns or accusative nouns or whatever, would be very difficult. But syntactically you can, because you can say, show me all the objects of prepositions where the subject is Jesus. Now, that gets to be a very complex search, but you need to know that this tool has the power to do that. And again, there are videos online that will teach you how to do that. And it's neat. But the most powerful section of the exegetical guide, and the one that you will use the most, is word by word. When you click word by word, it generates this exegetical guide, this report for word by word, and you'll notice that it shows me Philippians 1:1, it shows me the Greek text, and it shows me the English text first, side by side. Now, as I point at a Greek word, or as I point at an English word, it highlights the corresponding Greek word. So if I look at Jesus, you see Iesu in the Greek. And when I point at saint, Hagios is highlighted in the Greek. Do you see what it's doing here? So this is a cool connection with the original language. How is this possible? Well, this is where I want to stop and talk about Logos and why this tool is better than most other softwares that you have. In order to do this, I'm just going to close all for a minute because we're going to just deal with a Bible. And I want to show you, I'm going to use my New American Standard, but I want to show you what's happening with their Bibles. We haven't really looked at the Bible panel yet in detail, and it's time to do that so that we can understand the exegetical guide. When you look at your paper Bible, what information do you have on the page?
A few cross-references.
Okay, you have a few cross-references. And related to the text, what do you have?
Verses, chapters.
You have the verses, the chapters, and that kind of stuff. But what do you have here?
Footnotes.
You just have the English words, right? Now, if I'm in Philippians 1:1 in my paper Bible, what is the Greek word for saint there?
Hagios.
How do you know that?
Well, we know Greek vocab, but you don't technically know that. No.
Right. You don't know. Now, you may suspect that in Philippians 1:1 that word is hagios. You might be right. You might be wrong. How are you going to find out?
You're going to have your Greek New Testament.
Right. You're going to have to go look at the Greek. Well, with Logos, all of that information is built into the English versions. One of the things that Logos did that really sets them apart is they generated what they call reverse interlinears. Anybody ever use an old-time interlinear, a paper interlinear? Yeah. What are they?
Well, it just had the Greek text on one side, and then underneath it'll have the literal English meaning of the words, but it seems all jumbled.
Right.
And in the margin, it has it kind of put into an order where it makes sense to us.
Right. So it was a way in print to try to connect you to that original language. You know, when we recognize that we're dealing with translations, right? We all know that as English speakers, we are not looking at the original languages, right? They've all been translated. So we're looking at a translation. What we have always needed is a bridge to connect our translation to the original language. Now, we've tried to do that. Strong tried to do that with Strong's numbering, right? Remember James Strong in the 1800s assigned every Greek word and every Hebrew word a number and tried to make that connection, tried to build the first bridge to the original language. And for decades, close to a century, it was a great bridge. And there are still excellent resources that use Strong's numberings to do that. But what Logos has done is they've engineered what are called reverse interlinears. They start with the English translation instead of the original language, and they work backwards. Now, the way you can see what's included in your text is right up here at the top of your Bible resource panel. And you'll notice this third little icon over. It looks like Morse code. It looks like some dashes and dots. But if you hover over it, it's called the inline interlinear. If you click on this, you're going to see, and I'm going to turn all of mine on for just a second. You're going to see a checkbox for inline. I'm going to turn all of mine on. Yours are probably all turned on by default, unless you've been playing with this. And when you turn on this first checkbox, inline, you're going to see all the information that's available to you in your English text. One of the advantages of doing this digitally and not in print is that they can take a word and they can associate all this other information with it. So I'm going to go to Philippians 1:1 since that's what we're talking about. So in Philippians 1:1, when I look at the word saints, the first line, what do they call the first line if you look at that list?
Hagios?
Hagios?
No, I mean, in this list, what is this first line called?
Surface.
Okay, the surface is your translation. The
Manuscript.
second is your manuscript. So when I look at the first Greek word underneath the English, I'm looking at the manuscript form of the word. Okay? This is the original Greek manuscript word. Now, what's the problem with trying to match up the original manuscript with the English translation?
You can't do that between the two languages.
Why?
Because they're just different.
Now, give me a better answer than they're just different.
Greek is
The sentence structure is
The
different.
sentence
Said word order is going to be different in Greek than it is in English. So what did they do? Do you see these little numbers next to the manuscript form of the word? That's telling you the original order of the word in the original manuscript. So, for example, the original Greek manuscript starts out Paulos, Kai, Timotheos. So those three words are exactly the same. Douloi, bondservants, these are genitives, Christ Jesus, all of that is in the same order it was originally.
I think the whole first verse
Is the whole first verse?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is, actually. But most of the time, they have to rearrange the Greek words in order to make it line up with the English.
Verse 2 does that.
Yeah, verse 2 does not.
It's what makes me pull my hair out in Greek.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of our challenges because word order in Greek isn't as important as it is in English. Typically, English sentences have a sentence, a verb, and a direct object, usually in that order. The boy threw the ball, right? Well, in Greek, it can be the ball the boy threw. It's still subject, verb, direct object, but they don't care. It's kind of like speaking like Yoda, right? I mean, that's how they came up with the way Yoda talks. But that little number tells you where it was located in the original translation. The other interesting thing on the manuscript line is if you look at verse 1, you've got this little arrow. The arrow is telling you that the word of isn't really a Greek word. It's part of this phrase, Jesus Christ. Now, Not sure how much Greek you have yet.
Because it's genitive.
Because it's genitive. Yeah.
Right. So of is automatically added in English. But there's not an of word in Greek. It's just because it's the genitive that we have of. So an arrow tells you this word is associated with whatever word goes before or after it. Here's another one. The overseers. Well, there's no definite article here. So technically, verse 1 could be translated, including overseers and deacons. Now, they inserted the, but there is no definite article there. If I scroll down, I'm trying to say, where we see this the most is with verbs. Here's my remembrance. Here, in view of your, view of is all part of epi. And so those arrows are going to tell you where those words belong. But do you see all this data that's connected to our English? So if we pull this up for just a second, if we click on it, we can see how this plays out. You've got the manuscript form of the word. You see it?
Uh-huh.
Then the next one is the manuscript form transliterated, so that us English speakers can figure it out if our Greek is a little weak, right? This is this word, but just transliterated in English. We all understand what transliterated means? I don't have to explain that, right? Then you have the lemma. What is the lemma form of a word?
I don't know.
The lemma is the dictionary form of the word. If you were going to look this up in Art and Gingrich, you wouldn't look up poiomenos. That's not in there. It's under poieo. It's just a form of the verb poieo.
So you're saying
Say the root word?
Not root. Root's different.
Okay.
Okay? Stick with me. This will make more sense in a minute. Now, in this particular case, root and lemma are the same, but in most cases they're not. So the dictionary form of the word, the lemma, and then the lemma transliterated, and then you have the root and the root transliterated. Those two things may be the same in some cases, but a lot of times they're not. And I'll show you an example of that in just a second. We'll find an example where that plays out a little bit differently. You also have the morphology. Now, this is a cool, see where it says VP, MP? I'm going to click off of my list for just a second. If you hover over this word, you'll notice it parses it down here at the bottom. It's a verb, present middle participle. Verb, present middle participle. Do you see the abbreviation, VPMP? It could also be singular nominative masculine, which is, an extension to that. That's probably not a great one to show you, but all of those are showing you what the morphology is. And if you just point at the word, it'll give you the list along the bottom. We'll talk more about these as time goes along, and they'll become more powerful. The next in our list is the Strong's number. So this is the Strong's number for poieo. Now, poioumenos doesn't have a Strong's number. Poieo does. The dictionary form does. And so the Strong's number is 4160. And you could click on this, since it's blue, you could click on this, and it would do all kinds of searches for the Strong's number. And then you also have the last one in the list is called the Louw-Nida number. Now, Louw-Nida is a book filled with what they call semantic domains. Denny we'll talk about this more in exegesis. We'll talk about it a little bit more as we get further into Logos. But a word can have a range of meanings, right? I mean, we talked about the idea of brother. Well, brother can mean a brother in Christ, but it could also mean my physical brother, right? My blood brother. Well, Greek would use the same word. It would use adelphos. So how do you know which one's being used? Well, Louw-Nida went through just like James Strong, and instead of assigning each word a Strong's number, it said, okay, in the range of possible meanings of this word, this is how this word could be broken down. It could mean this, could mean that, could mean this. And they organized that all into a numeric system called Louw-Nida numbers. That's all you really need to know for now. Is anybody at this point totally confused? And please raise your hand if you are. Okay, good. Okay, so the important thing to understand about all of this is that since all of this information is connected to the English word, it's hidden typically. I mean, it's behind the scenes. But since it's all connected to this word, now when we look at this word joy, we can do all kinds of cool things with it. We can look at original language connections without knowing the original language. Now, before Will Hanstein kills me, because you guys all say, Mike said we didn't need to learn Greek in order to do this, you need to understand the more Greek you know, the more Hebrew you know, the more powerful this tool is going to become. But it is a bridge that allows you to deal with the English text and do searches and things from the original language, but see the results in English, which is really powerful. I mean, that one concept alone, I think, is why Logos stands out from everything else. I can search the New Testament for every place the word joy occurs, and I can do it two ways. I can search for every place the English word joy occurs. Is that going to be every place the Greek word joy occurs? No, because the translators may have chosen to translate the word charis differently in another context. It may not be joy. It may be something else, and so I wouldn't have found it. But also, if I wanted to make sure that I'm finding every place that the original language word charis shows up, I can right-click on the English word joy, search by the Greek, but see the English. Now, that'll all make a whole lot more sense later on. But I want you to see what's built into your English text. To turn this off, all I have to do is go click under my little inline panel and turn off inline, and it all goes away again.
Why would you ever want to turn it off?
Well, for
No, I'm
one,
just kidding. It's good.
This makes it really bulky. But what I do, like for example, I don't use Louw-Nida numbers. I don't use semantic domains when I do exegesis. I don't find a need to very often, and I can do it other ways, so I turn that off. I also don't use Strong's numbers typically, so I turn that off. I usually leave on the manuscript. I'll turn off manuscript transliterated. I'll usually leave the lemma on and the root on and the morphology. And see, now this becomes more manageable. Yes?
I'm just curious. Mine's got at the bottom down here, it has.
Right, that's because you clicked on a button I haven't told you to click on yet.
I can't figure out how to turn it off.
Okay, this right next to, see where my cursor is up here at the top? Mm-hmm. Right next to the inline interlinear page is the interlinear panel. And when you click on that, you see all of the same stuff, but down here below. So just click on that button again and it'll go away. There's two ways to look at this. One problem with doing it this way is you've got all this information here that makes it hard to read the English, right? I mean, this makes it hard to follow the flow of the English. So what I could do is I could turn off the inline, and now I could turn on the interlinear, which puts all of that information at the bottom. And now whenever I click on a word, it shows me all of that information at the bottom. So it just kind of depends on how you prefer it. But you got lots of customization. So do you see all of this information that's behind the English? I hope you do. Okay. So I'm going to go back, and I'm going to go back to where we were, Philippians 1:1 from the home page, and we'll go back to the exegetical guide in just a second. And now you'll understand some of the mechanics in the exegetical guide. When I look at the word by word section, how is it that I can point to the word Paul and it highlights Paulos over here.
Paulos is the Greek word for Paul.
Well, but how is it that it knows that automatically? Because they're both connected. The original language version and the English version are both connected. Notice what it's saying here. This is the New American Standard 95 update. This is the New American Standard 95 update, New Testament reverse interlinear. Okay? So what it's doing is it's taking the manuscript out of my New American Standard and it's putting it side by side. And so the original language and the English are connected. The only thing that's different is this is the original word order from the manuscript, okay? And this is our English. So when you'll see word order changes when you point to things. For example, when you point to saints, it's two saints. It highlights both. That's all contained in that word hagios, all right? Do you see what's going on here? Now,
How come it wants to highlight some and not others?
because you can set which ones it works with and which ones it doesn't. Let me expand this out some. You can tell it, if you put your cursor over the word-by-word title, you're going to see the little settings box come up. Now, don't change yours at this point, but mine are only set to talk about verbs, nouns, adjectives, and adverbs. I don't want to mess with pronouns, prepositions, and conjunctions. They're minor to me, and I usually don't want to see them. But if I turn these all on, or just click on Show All Parts of Speech, now all of them will work, and I can look at all the words. You follow? So I can control which ones show up in this list and which ones don't. What I care about most for my study typically is verbs, nouns, adjectives, and adverbs. So I just turn these three off. And that makes this report a little easier to manage. Make sense? Okay. Again, you see that this tool is extremely customizable. As your vocabulary gets better and you don't need to have it tell you what chi means every time, well, take it off of the, don't show the conjunctions. Keep them at, you know what they are anyway. And so you don't need them as much. So I'm looking at this word by word and I see this word saints. So I click on it. What it does is it takes me down the list, and this is the one thing I don't like about this report. The word that you clicked on is at the bottom of the column. It scrolls as far as it needs to show you where that word is. It doesn't bring it all the way to the top. I wish it just brought it all the way to the top and made it easy. But when I clicked on hagios, saints, it just gave me enough to see it on my list. Now, I'm going to go ahead and drag it up to the top so it's easier for everybody to see. But you remember the exegetical guide is dealing with the components of the passage. And so in this case, it tells me that my Greek word is hagios. It gives me the transliteration. How is it able to do that? Because the transliteration is part of the reverse interlinear, right? You have the manuscript form, the manuscript transliterated, the lemma form, the lemma transliterated, the root transliterated. All those transliterations are in there. So that helps me pronounce it. It shows me the context from the verse, what I'm dealing with. I was looking at saints. It gives me the Greek word here and gives me an opportunity to since it's a hyperlink, to launch a Bible word study. We're not going to do that yet. Don't click on it yet. Some of you probably already did. Come back to the light and come back to the exegetical guide. The next thing you'll see is a little speaker icon. I didn't mean to do that. If I click on that,
Hagios.
it pronounces the Greek word for me.
Hagios.
So, especially with some complex Greek words, there are times that I look at them and go, tell me how to say that. So, it'll pronounce it for you. It also gives you what's called, what they often will call a gloss. Now, a gloss in Logos, these are, I'm kind of giving you the glossary for Logos, how these terms are used. The gloss is the most basic definition of the word, okay? This word simply means holy or holy ones. Now, there's a whole lot more to this word than that, right? We got that? This is as small a definition as they can give you. Oftentimes it would be potentially how it might be translated, but they're just trying to give you a very, very basic definition of what hagios is. It also tells me that it's an adjective, dative, plural, masculine. So I have all of this Greek. Now, what is dative?
Indirect object.
Okay? If I forget that, I can just hover over these morphological forms, and dative is the case that is regularly used for indirect objects and objects of some prepositions. The dative refers to the person or the thing to which something is given or for whom something is done. So I get a definition of dative right there in Logos. We know what adjectives are, and I don't think we need the rest of that. But sometimes, okay, what is aorist? You know, I'm struggling with aorist. Well, if I find a verb that's aorist, I can just hover over it and it'll tell me. You follow? So that's very cool. If you click on dative, don't click on it, but if you click on it, it will open up, if you have grammars, Greek grammars in your library, it'll open you up to an article on the dative and reteach you what dative is in much more depth than just this little window. So we see that it's an adjective, dative, plural, masculine. Now this is, when it says sense, this is that Bible sense lexicon that I mentioned before. We've only talked about it a couple of times, but it's trying to tell you, in this case, the sense of the word. In this case, it's a person of God, a holy one. And that's literally what hagios means, right? It's translated saints, but it really means holy ones. It comes from the same word as holy. And so we could easily translate to the holy ones at Philippi. And it's the same kind of idea. But Bible sense will tell you that. Now, if you hover over it, it'll give you more of an elaborate detail. And we'll see more of how this Bible sense thing plays out as we go along. And then it connects you to lexicons, okay? Not leprechauns, but lexicons. And your lexicons will tell you, okay, what is a lexicon?
Gives you the root of every word.
No, it doesn't.
Oh.
Is it a Greek dictionary?
It is a Greek dictionary. It basically gives you how the word is defined.
Only in the root form, though, right?
In the lemma form, not the root.
Okay, the lemma.
We're going to have a real hard time, and this takes a while. We're going to have a real hard time differentiating between lemma and root, and you really do have to get those two things clear in your mind. We'll play that out, and you'll see why as we move forward. But sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're not. For example, just off the top of my head, the word Philadelphia in Greek, phileo adelphos, brotherly love, right? Well, what's the lemma? The dictionary form of that word would be Philadelphia. You would look up in BDAG, Art and Gingrich, or a lexicon, you would look up phileo adelphios, right? But it's made up of two roots, phileo, to love, and adelphos, brother. So roots can be very different than the lemma. Sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're not. So, but we're going to see the power of roots played out big time. So when you look something up in a lexicon, you look up the lemma form, not the root. As a matter of fact, you won't find roots very often in lexicons. You'll find the lemmas, the dictionary form of the word. So in this case, I want to know what hagios is in Art and Gingrich. I can hover over it, and there's the Art and Gingrich article, since I have Art and Gingrich, for this. Now, what's the first lexicon you guys have? If you have Art and Gingrich, it may be there, but what do you have underneath here other than BDAG? What's your first one?
LSJ, whatever that is.
Okay. So if I scroll down here,
I've got Laonida.
the only thing you have there is Laonida? You don't
No,
have
I have
anything
other.
else?
I have others. Yeah.
Okay. I don't have LSJ.
That was my very next one.
What is LSJ?
I guess I could hover over it.
Yeah, if you hover over it, it might tell
It's
you.
just giving me a definition of the word.
Okay,
It's not
if you,
saying what it is.
if you click on it, it'll
Where will
If
it
you
open
right
up?
click on it,
it'll just open up in one of the panels. It should open up in the commentary panel, but sometimes it opens in the Bible panel, sometimes it opens wherever.
It just says it's a Greek English lexicon.
Okay, and then if you click the little info button, the little I at the top right of the panel, it should tell you what the book is.
It just says Greek English lexicon, and it gives the guy's name, but it says it's the world's most authoritative dictionary of ancient Greek.
There you go. So that's the lexicon that you have.
I got a bunch more. But
Right. So that was the first one. Now we're gonna show you how to prioritize these. For example, how many of you bought Art and Gingrich? How many of you have Art and Gingrich? You're going to want to have Art and Gingrich as the first one on your list. It's probably not the first one on your list right now. It's probably in the list somewhere. But I'm going to show you eventually how to start to customize all of this so that Art and Gingrich is the first one on your list. But if I click on BDAG, Art and Gingrich, notice I get the panel. I'm going to go ahead and float the panel so that we see it. Here's the article from Art and Gingrich. If I click on, I can see that I looked up the word hagios, right, up here at the top. If I click on it, it's on page 10 of the 3rd edition of Art and Gingrich. Now, if I sent somebody upstairs and had them grab the 3rd edition of Art and Gingrich from the library shelf and turn to page 10, they would find hagios, right? What does that tell you about this electronic resource?
Is it comparable to the paper copies?
It's not comparable.
It saves you a lot of time.
It's citable,
Oh,
right?
okay, yeah.
If I look this up in Art and Gingrich, I can cite page 10 of Art and Gingrich, and it doesn't matter that I'm looking at it in Logos. It's not an electronic copy. It's actually the equivalent of the paper copy. So if I cite this as Bauer, page 10 in a research paper, anybody that has the print edition or the Logos edition can find it. That's another difference between Logos, is most of, not all, and they seem to not be as diligent about this recently, and that's upsetting me. Most of the resources can give you a page number that is the equivalent of the print resource. Now, they are starting to develop some just electronic resources that never were in print. And so you don't have page numbering to cite from. But most of these real classic resources, like the early church fathers or Art and Gingrich or those kinds of things, you can actually say, Volume 3, page 259 of the Ante-Nicene Fathers, and go upstairs and find the exact same quote. You follow? So very cool. So I'm connected. Now, where am I? Right now, just where am I?
All you did was click on, you clicked on BDAG, didn't you?
Right. So I'm at a Greek definition of the word saint from Art and Gingrich, and how did I get here?
Well, you clicked on, you're in an exegetical guide, you clicked on hagios, and then
But how did I get to all this information?
just by the click.
Go looking in your Bible.
I typed Philippians 1:1 on the homepage and hit enter. Right? Have I done? I'm just looking at the reports the librarian gave me after I typed Philippians 1:1 and hit enter. And she looked all this stuff up for me. And it's all sitting here waiting for me to explore it. I didn't have to do anything else. I didn't have to go in my library and find out the Greek word is hagios. It tells me the word is hagios. I didn't have to know that ahead of time. I'm going to close it. It told me that it's hagios, and then it gives me all these lexicons, and all I got to do is click on them. Here's the TDNT article for hagios. If I float the panel, here's TDNT. I'm looking at the article for hagios, which is TDNT Volume 1, page 88 of that 10-volume set. How did I get here? I typed Philippians 1:1 on the home page of Logos and hit go. And now all of this information is available to me. Now, flashback to Eleanor. If I had said, find out what the Greek word is for saints in Philippians 1:1, and then give me the TDNT article and the BDAG definition of this word, how long would that have taken you? The entire class. Hopefully it wouldn't have taken you the entire class. But what would you have had to do? I mean, think of all the hoops you would have had to jump through. First, you would have had to do something to just even find out that the word saints there is the word hagios. You would have had to look it up in a concordance. You would have had to find some connection to find out what the Greek word is. Then you'd have to find that Greek, go find BDAG on the shelf, find hagios, look it up, go find TDNT on the shelf, find out what volume contains the word hagios, find it. It's all right here. And the cool part is, watch this. If this definition is really neat, and I like this, I can say copy. I can open Pages. I can open a new document. I can say paste. And there's the quotation from TDNT. I can even set it up so that it would paste in the reference for me as a footnote, and I can reformat it into my own bibliography. But if I needed to, I could just insert a page break here. I can come back to TDNT. I can say, here's my citation. Copy. Works. Cited. And now I can format that the way I need to and get the rest of the information, and I'm halfway there. Yes?
Where did you find how to get your bibliography entry right there?
If you just hit the information icon on a resource window, it's going to bring up information about the book, and there should be a citation. Warning, their citations are not always correct, even if it says MLA style. But it's got most of it. For example, none of the publishing information is in this citation. And we're griping at Logos about fixing that. But it's at least a start. You follow?
Mine seems to have the publishing information. Grand Rapids, Eerdmans Publishing Company.
Cool. Yeah, mine's not. So. Okay, so I can explore what the word saints is. I can come back up to the top of this report, and I'm looking at the word overseer. Click on the word overseer. It tells me that the word is episkopos. And actually episkopois, since it's plural. It's another noun dative plural masculine.
Episkopos.
Episkopos. It's an overseer of the church, a leader who watches over, or directs, or cares for, according to the Bible Sense lexicon. Again, I have connections to BDAG. So I click on BDAG. I open BDAG. Now watch this. So I'm looking at this word episkopos. You remember working in BDAG before? Looking for a reference, for example, how did Josephus ever use this word? Well, I'm scanning through the definitions here, and I see that in Josephus Antiquities 1053, Josephus used this word. All I have to do is hover over it, and there is the quotation from Josephus. If I want to actually find that quotation to Josephus, I click on it. It opens Josephus, and there's the quotation from Josephus, and I could cite that source. Remember how long it took to do that otherwise? Now, how did I get to an article in Jewish Antiquities written by Josephus using the Greek word episkopos?
I typed Philippians.
I typed Philippians 1:1 and said go. That's all I did. Okay? Are we starting to see some power here? Are we starting to see the connections as we go through? Okay, we'll pick this up after chapel.
So, looking at Episcopos, if you hover over, you get this detailed graph, but there's more functionality to this, but not in this report. Yes?
So now when it says it's, translated overseer or overseers, what does that mean exactly as far as into which translation or which version? Because
right now it's just dealing with your core translation, which is probably going to be your New American Standard, since that's what we set it up as. So it's going to tell you it's translated overseer or overseers or guardian. That's the only way this word is translated. It can be translated, you can see, right underneath the word in gray, it can be translated bishop. I mean, that's an acceptable translation. But the translation that you're using is going to translate it as overseer or guardian. I'm not aware of any place where the New American Standard uses bishop. So that's a possible translation, and other versions would have that. Now, if you set this to a New King James, this would be a little different. It may show bishop and guardian instead of overseer. So again, it's using your base translation to generate some of this information. But what it's really showing you is how many times the Greek word episkopos occurs, and then how it's being translated. Does everybody remember the Englishman's Greek Concordance from Language and Research? What does an Englishman's Greek Concordance do?
Shows you every occurrence of every word.
Every occurrence of a Greek word, regardless of how it's translated in English. This is kind of a mini Englishman's Concordance, right? It's just telling you it occurs 5 times and it's translated these different ways. Now, it doesn't show you the passages. We'll do that later. We'll do that once we get to a Bible word study. But this just says it occurs 5 times in the New Testament and it's translated these ways. And you can kind of tell by the ring, the vast majority of the time it's translated overseer or overseers. You follow? So, again, just kind of a quick visual of that. Now, I mentioned under the morphology, you've got this idea of noun, dative, plural, masculine. You also have that this is a prepositional object. This deals with syntactically analyzed texts, and so this is functioning as the object of a preposition. And we aren't going to deal with a lot of that, but including the overseers and deacons is a prepositional phrase, and so it's telling you that it functions as a preposition. Again, that's more advanced Greek, and
if you clicked on that, it takes us to what?
It'll take you to a book that will explain syntactical, grammar. So we talked about Bible sense a little bit. We'll see that now. Here's a great example of, and this will help us to get to the next level and talk about lemmas and roots. Okay, we've been talking about this struggle between what's the difference between a lemma and a root. Let's say we now want to move to the next level. We got passage guide, looks at what?
The basics of everything.
Yeah, the passage as a whole. We got exegetical guide that breaks it into chunks. And now we can start to look at just one specific word. So let's say that we've kind of, from the exegetical guide, we're fascinated by this word overseer. We want to learn more about it. We can just click on the Greek word here, and it's going to generate what's called a Bible word study. I'm just going to go ahead and grab mine and drag it over here with these other guides so that it takes up the same column. And again, you'll notice that all of mine are collapsed. I just keep them, the little expansion arrows, I keep them all collapsed so that this report generates quickly. Again, at the very top of the Bible word study, you can name it and save it. You can create a description if you want. And the first thing it deals with is the lemma. Now you'll notice that this is very much like what we saw in the exegetical guide. You have the Greek word, episkopos, you have it transliterated, you have a gloss, a basic definition, you can pronounce it.
Episkopos.
You have links to your lexicons. You also have morphology charts. We'll talk about those later. I don't want to deal with those right now. But you've got this basic information about the dictionary form of the word. You also have this density graph. Now this density graph is more interactive. You'll see that it occurs 5 times, but as you hover over it, you'll see that it occurs once in the book of Acts. It occurs once in the book of Philippians. It occurs once in 1 Timothy, once in Titus, and once in 1 Peter. There's our 5 occurrences. Now, you don't have to play that little game of trying to point at it, but it's just trying to show you where this word is distributed. Okay? Where does the word appear throughout the New Testament? Yes.
Mine's not coming up as I hover over it.
Mine either.
Mine didn't either. It's not that one. It's
What do you mean it doesn't come up?
oh,
as a hover over?
they don't have it floated. I have 2 different here. Do you have this
Wait,
floated?
wait, Jordan, what?
I don't see anything.
What do you mean it?
As you hover over it, it shows you which where the word is found. It's not doing that as I'm hovering over that little bar like you're doing.
Nothing shows up?
Nothing.
Right.
I don't have an answer for that one. I mean, it doesn't have to be floated or anything, so I'm not sure why. But no matter what you point at, nothing happens. Yeah.
Okay, like when I floated mine though, that has that same bar, and there's 2 of them now, and the second bar does bring that up. What you're doing?
Right, but we haven't gotten there yet. Though.
Okay.
We're still under lemma.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, translation does.
Translation does.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure why it wouldn't be. Anybody with a these aren't slams against PCs. Anybody with a PC, does it work for you? Rob, is it working for you when you point at it?
Nope.
Jesse?
Not on the dilemma.
Okay.
Translation, it does.
Gary, you're on a Mac. Does it work on your Mac?
My Mac is moving super slow right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mac users, it's working. Okay. This may be a Mac PC issue. So it may give you that highlight. It shows you the graph, but it may not be interactive on the PC, it sounds like, from a few of you that have PCs and it's not working. But Macs, it is. So that may be just a feature that's temporarily disabled on the PC for some reason. But that seems to be the problem, because our Mac guys are using it and the PC guys aren't. So that's lemma. We'll come back to morphology charts later on. The next one is translation, and translation is going to give you the same density graph. So does it? And you're saying it's interactive on the translation one, but not on the lemma one.
Yes, sir.
That's interesting. Now, your translation ring functions. Do you see even the shape of the ring, and the blue and the red is the same as that little graphic that we were looking at a minute ago? So the advantage of the translation ring is you've got a couple of options. One is if you point to the blue section of the ring, it'll show you that it's translating that overseer. Do you see that from the graphic? If you click on the blue section of the ring, it'll pull that part of the ring out, and then it shows you that 4 of the 5 occurrences in the New Testament all translate this word episkopos as overseer or overseers, and it'll show you the verses. If you click on the red part of the ring, it'll show you that it's in 1 Peter 2, that it uses it as guardian. So there's all 5 occurrences. If you want to see all 5 occurrences together in the list, click on the word in the middle of the ring. And you'll notice it'll separate it by the different ways that it's translated. It'll show you the 4 that are overseer, but the 1 that's guardian. So this becomes an Englishman's Greek concordance, organized by the way it's translated in your English text. So it's going to organize them all together by how they're translated. So this is every occurrence of this word in the New Testament and how it's translated. Again, if you remember how to use the Englishman's Concordance, it was a little clunky, it's kind of hard to use. and look at how quickly you can get to an Englishman's Concordance. And you can also just deal with each individual part of the ring if you want to. And then if you click on this, obviously it'll take your Bible to those passages and so on. But the translation ring gets really powerful. Now, the next you should have is Septuagint translation. This becomes really cool as you start to learn a little bit more about what is the Septuagint?
Greek translation.
Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament. So, what is this showing you? If this is about the Septuagint translation, what is this graph showing you?
Times these words are used in the Septuagint.
Okay, what words?
Well, the one that we're looking at the moment is.
Okay, so it's showing you every place episkopos is used in the Septuagint in the Old Testament.
And then it goes back to the Hebrew.
Yeah, it shows you all of the Hebrew words that the Greek translators chose episkopos to translate. You follow? So they used episkopos, but there are a number of a number of Hebrew words. Now, I don't know Hebrew, but here's this Hebrew word, quadah, or something along those lines, that was translated using episkopos. And so you can explore how episkopos was used to substitute Hebrew words. That can be valuable if you're doing a word study in Greek in the New Testament. Say, look how these guys, what Hebrew words they were even using to replace with this word episkopos, to get a sense of what they were trying to accomplish when they used that Greek word. You follow? So this is the translator's choices related to episkopos. Now, it tells you in the density graph that it was used 15 times. If you click in the word episkopos in the center, it's going to show you all 15. 5 times it was this word quad, 4 times the next one, twice the next one, and then once for each additional ones. And you could do Bible word studies on these Hebrew words by clicking on here, and you could explore those Hebrew words. And so now, again, we're looking at how the Septuagint translators used episkopos to translate Hebrew words, and all we did was type in Philippians 1:1 and hit go. And now we're making all of these studies on even how the translators of the Septuagint use this word. So that's Septuagint translation. The next is root, and hopefully this is going to clear up some of the root lemma discussion. Notice that the root for this is the word skopeo. I mean, the word is episkopos, but it's the root skopeo. And skopeo means to take care of, or to see to it, or to watch over. And there are a number of words in the New Testament that use this root. The first one being episkopos, the one that we're looking at. It occurs 5 times. You'll notice skopeo is used 14 times in the New Testament, but episkopos is used 5 times. So you've got epi, the prefix epi, added to the root in order to create this idea of an overseer, a person that oversees. You've got episkope, episkopeo, which is going to be the verb to oversee. You've got this really long one, aletri episkopos. Alotri episkopos. Okay, that's easy. So you could pronounce those words, but now you're seeing how this root is used throughout the New Testament, not just episkopos. Now, that becomes an important concept, because is a writer using a particular root throughout a section of his text? For example, if we were going to look up the word faith in the book of James, if we were going to do a word study on faith, faith is one of your vocabulary words, right? That you've had in Greek?
Yeah.
So what is the base Greek word for faith?
Pistos.
Okay. Which one's the noun?
What do you mean? Which
Pistuo.
one? Pistuo.
Pistuo
Yeah.
about the noun?
No, pistuo is the verb.
Pistuo is the verb. Pistis is the noun, right? Now, if you were going to look up one of those in a lexicon, which one would you look up?
The noun.
You look up both,
Oh.
but they're going to be separately listed in a dictionary. I mean, Art Gingrich is going to give you a definition for pistuo and a definition for pistis. The root there is going to be the pistuo, okay? And they share the same root. So one of the things that Logos is going to let us do is Logos is going to let us search for words by root and see all of the associated words that are using that root in a book or in a section. So that becomes, now we can start to see how a particular author was using that core word throughout his entire writing. Roots came about, I think, as of version 5, but they've become a lot more powerful in version 6. And this really has been a game changer as far as especially when we get to how to keyword a book, and we'll probably start working on that next week. How to break a book down by keywords is very cool, and we can do that by root. If we do it by lemma, we have to do searches for all of these different words. Pistuo, pistis, I'm trying to think, faithful is going to be another one that's going to have a slightly different form. And all of those would be different lemmas that share the same root, pistuo. Make sense? For example, here, scopos is the root. But there's all of these different scopos words that could be used by the author. All right? And these are the lemmas of this particular root. Now, this root report in the Bible Word Study is something that you really need to start looking at, because you're going to be fascinated sometimes by how many different words are associated to the same root. Especially words like say or called, laleo, is going to be connected to dozens of other words. And that concept of to call, laleo, to speak, is going to be contained in lots of other words. So if you want to see how Paul is using the concept of laleo throughout a particular writing, you would really need to find all of those words, not just laleo. You follow? Is it making sense? Okay, I know I need to stop saying it. I've done better.
I was sitting here thinking.
Yeah. Now, you do have some settings here, and you'll notice that the setting is your default Bible. So this is just looking at the roots and the number of occurrences in your New American Standard. If you click on it, you can click other versions to see how those roots play out. That's true with most all of these sections. When you hover over the title of the report panel, you usually have a little settings thing that comes up, and you can choose which Septuagint, for example, that you look at. Or you can look at, under root, you can change which Bible it's using. But there's almost always settings in each one of those, but you don't see them until you hover over that title bar. So we've got all of these different lemmas of the root skopeo, and it shows us where all those are. Now, I can do Bible word studies on all of these just by clicking on them. And it would regenerate this whole Bible word study report for each of these additional words, and I could see all of this information for each one. Senses is what I was talking about before. Senses is a database that Logos has developed. This is not based on a book. This is a database that they've created manually that is trying to say, okay, in the what is the sense in which this word is being used? If it was brother, what kind of brother? Is that a physical brother, a blood brother, a spiritual brother? How is brother being used here? Now, for episkopos, since there's only 5 occurrences, it just says that it's an overseer of the church. But you have a little expansion ring here, or excuse me, a little context arrow, and it'll show you each place that it's showing up as that. And it says the sense is a leader who watches over, directs, cares, or is accountable for an assembly of believers. And then it shows you where those occur. So and they're fleshing out this sense lexicon more and more. Now, for you, and this goes to Jesse, your question before the break, when you start to do a Bible words, a word study, like you have to do a word study in this class, the different senses in which a word can be used may be helpful to you in determining your buckets. Now, those of you that are sophomores that haven't done a word study yet, when you read Denny's instructions on doing a word study, one of the things he's going to say is you find every occurrence of the word, and then you try to organize it into buckets as far as how is he using this word. What different senses, in essence, is he using this word? For example, if we were doing adelphos, if we were doing brother, your buckets might be, well, here he's talking about his spiritual brethren, but here he's talking about his physical brother. That would be two different buckets of how he's using the word adelphos. You follow? Well, this Bible sense lexicon can help you, give you some clues on how these buckets are being arranged. Now, it's not foolproof, but it's a start, and you can start to clarify that and play with that a little bit, okay? And I'll show you in a minute how we can adjust this Bible word study to do exactly that. Episkopos isn't a good word because it really only has one sense. In the New Testament, it refers to the overseers. It doesn't have lots of other kinds of senses about it since it only occurs 5 times. But this sense report can be very helpful to you when you go to write, to begin doing research for your word study. Okay, and I'll show you how to play with that in just a minute. All right, so example uses is going to get into syntactical stuff again. Example uses is it's going to show you, for example, here where this word is used as a subject or other things. In this case, it only used it once to show you an example of how it's used as a subject. You can also click on the Greek, and it'll show it to you in Greek. I typically leave it as English. But this is part of that syntactically analyzed New Testament. We'll deal with some more of that as we go along and show you where that plays out. We're going to skip clause participants for 2 reasons. One is it's all about syntax. Second of all, this is brand new in Logos6, and I haven't had a chance to play with it enough yet to really understand what it's showing you. So that and case frames both, we'll talk about before the end of the class, the end of the course. But right now, I think it would just muddy the water. The other one that I want to show you is preposition use. And for episkopos, it's not going to do a whole lot. But you may see in your Greek grammar that you're learning in Greek, you guys are using machen. Have you guys gotten to prepositions at all yet?
Yes.
Okay. You may have seen a chart very much like this. It's kind of faint on my screen to project it, but you'll see it. You may have seen in machen a chart like this. Prepositions often show direction or association, right? And so in this case, the only preposition that's used with the word episkopos is this with word. It's the only preposition in the New Testament that is associated. But if there were others, it would show you the relationship of these prepositions to this word in other verses. And how those prepositions are showing direction. But you've got ace, into, right? Dia is through. Ek is out of. See how the arrow for ek shows out of. So it really shows you how these prepositions function visually. And this is a great study tool. This little chart is a great chart to help you memorize prepositions. So you might want to make a copy of this on a card and remember, okay, ace is into, dia is through, ek is out of, meta is, and so on. And you can, ana is up and so forth. So you can kind of deal with that as you go through this.
Do they have it more visible somewhere?
No, because it's trying to show you how these words are being used. So it's only going to show it to you when it's applicable. We'll look at another word in just a second, and it may show up with more stuff.
So essentially this circle is your cat with the box.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, or your tree, whichever. But yeah, my cat with the box from Language and Research. Everything that can happen to that box in a Greek preposition. So phrases, there aren't any textual searches. Textual searches is very, very cool. What this does is it automatically searches other resources that you have in your Bible, or in your library, for this Greek word. For example, we already know that it occurs 5 times in the New Testament, right? It occurs 15 times in the Septuagint. We already knew that. But this word, episkopos, is used 76 times in the Apostolic Fathers. Now, think about that for just a second. Here, let me see if I can make this. I see people in the back going, I can't see. Let me see if I can make it any bigger. There we go. Does that help?
Yeah.
So, this word episkopos is used 76 times in the Apostolic Fathers. What's the time frame for the Apostolic Fathers? I'll get to you in just a second, Max. When was the Apostolic Fathers written? We talked about it in Eleanor.
First and second century.
Yeah, pretty early. I mean, it's probably the earliest to the New Testament that we have outside of the New Testament.
Almost contemporary.
Almost, not quite, but pretty close. So, 76 times they're talking about this word. If you're going to really study episkopos, you're going to want to narrow it down to where is it used in the New Testament and how did the inspired writers use it, but also what was the sense at the time of this word? What other writings used this word, and what were they bringing to the table as far as that word? Well, you got 76 occurrences in the Apostolic Fathers. This is not a rare word, right? I mean, to the Greek mindset, this was not a rare word. It's relatively rare in the New Testament, only 5 occurrences, but this is not a word that was unknown to the Greek culture of the time, if the Apostolic Fathers used it 76 times. Max.
Actually, I figured it out. You have a different number than I do, but I have Apostolic Fathers and Josephus as 2 separate numbers.
Okay, yeah, you have different books.
Yeah.
So you have different books than I do, and so you're going to get some slightly different results. For example, you may not even have the pseudepigrapha. I have R.H. Charles' pseudepigrapha in my library, and my librarian knows that. So since I have the pseudepigrapha in Greek, she knows to look that up for me. So your list may vary again, depending on the size of your library. For example, I also have Philo, used it 11 times. So if I click on Philo here, and I float this panel to show it to you, here are the 11 occurrences where Philo used episkopos. And I can now go through these and find from the original language where it was used and look it up in English, kind of like Logos Classic does, right, where you see the Greek and you. So if I have Philo in English, I can now track that down, and I can do that study and know that I'm looking at episkopos, not just the word overseer or bishop and wondering, is that episkopos or did he use some other word, or is some other word being translated there? I hate to keep hammering this, but I really want you to understand what we did. I'm now studying the Greek word episkopos in the works of Philo related to Philippians 1:1. How? I typed Philippians 1:1 on the home page of Logos and hit go. That's all I did. And now I'm just exploring all of this information that Logos is giving me. There was another hand.
I was just wondering what classics is. I mean, it must be another thing that you've...
Classics, about 2 or 3 years ago, Logos made an entire Greek classics library available for free. It was called the Pegasus Library, and it's literally a couple of thousands of classic Greek resources that they made available for free, and I was dumb enough to download it, and so I have like an extra, 800 Greek books in here. But the neat thing is that now that it does those searches, it finds it in classic literature outside of religious literature, and you can kind of start to see, okay, 121 times they had this idea of overseer. How did they use it in classical Greek? How did they, what was this concept of an episkopos or skopos, to overseer, to watch over? How was that being played out in literature outside the religious community? Yeah.
Okay, this on the Bible word study, you know how in yours it says passage guide, and then it has the exegetical guide, and then your Bible word study next to it up there. Why is mine not popping up as a tab up there?
Oh, he drug it up.
Yeah, because I drug it up there. When I first opened it, I told you guys I'm dragging this up
Over
here
to the
so
other
it'll
side.
show up there.
Okay.
See, because when you click on it, it opens in whatever panel it seems to want to. I wish you could right-click on it and say, open it in this panel or something. You can't. Now, hopefully, enough of us are yelling at Logos that someday that might be possible. But a lot of times when you launch these things, they open wherever you want. You got to drag it to wherever. And you just grab the tab, and you can drag it wherever you want. And you can kind of see where it's going to insert itself. But I just keep all of my guides together.
Gotcha.
So I put it in my... All right, so are you starting to see passage? Break it down exegetically, and then look at the individual words. Now, I'm going to close this on Episcopos because I want to do one more out of Philippians 1:1 from the exegetical guide. I want to look at this word diakonos. So I'm going to click on the hyperlinked word diakonos, the lemma, in order to create a Bible word study. Again, I'm going to have to drag it back into that column where I want it. So, when I look at the translation, I see that this word occurs 27 times in the New Testament. It's translated servant, minister, or deacon. Now, when we think of a diakonos, oftentimes the first word that comes to it, the first thought that we have is deacon, right? But when we start to look at this, we realize if I click on deacon, 3 of the 27 times it's translated as deacon. What is the essence of a deacon?
Servant.
A servant or minister, really, more so than deacon. Now, 3 times the translators decided to give it the title deacon. Why? Well, usually because it's talking about the qualifications of these men, as if that's a role in the church, which it is, and so there are qualifications for deacons, and so rather than just saying a servant must likewise be men of dignity and so on, why would that be confusing? Well, everybody who serves has to have the qualifications of a deacon? No, but there does seem to be this servant minister role in the church that has qualifications. So they just transliterated the word and said, okay, there must be these guys named deacons. But it only occurs 3 times out of the 27. Click on the word diakonos in the middle, and you'll notice how it organizes it. 18 of 27 times it's servant. As you scroll down, 6 times out of 27 it's minister. And then 3 of the 27 is deacon. Now, what I really wanted to show you here, and I'm not going to chase a rabbit that's going to come up in just a second, but I really wanted to show you senses. If you go down to the senses report, you'll notice it's saying that there are 2 senses to this word, an attendant or a servant, and then a deacon. Now, it's interesting that it's translated deacon 3 times, right? We saw that. But here it says, in the Bible sense lexicon, 4 times it has the idea of deacon. Well, why? Well, if you click the little expansion ring, you'll notice that Romans 16:1, they include Phoebe as a deacon. Even though the New American Standard chose to translate it servant, they're saying, no, she was a deacon. So, there's a little bias that sneaks in here from time to time. You see it? You got to be aware of those things. Is it that Phoebe was a deacon or a deaconess? That's a discussion for Dan when he teaches you Romans. We're not going to get into that here. But you'll notice that they kind of slipped that in. There were only 3 times it was translated deacon, but in the Bible sense lexicon, they said 4 times it's used that way. You've got to be able to differentiate those. Do you see it? All right. And I've translated from you follow. Do you see it?
That Romans 16:1 seems to be in both of those.
Yeah, because it could be either. And so they're hedging their bets most likely. You know, one of the things that Logos is pretty good about, yeah, it's there in 16:1, and they have to deal with it as a servant because that's the word the translators chose, right? It'd be really hard for them to say the translators chose servant, but there's really no sense of this word as servant. It really means this instead. I mean, they're not going to do that. So they're going to show it in both lists in order to kind of hedge the bet. But are you seeing how Bible Sense starts to break it down for you into how the word might be used? You follow? All right. I know. Hush, Bob. All right. Let's close that Bible word study for just a second, and we're going to go off the grid a second with these Bible word studies. Let's go up to Guide and open Bible word study. Now, it's going to paste in the Greek word that you used before, and it's going to ask you if you want to generate it from this. In this case, I don't want to. And I'm hoping that this works the way it used to. It doesn't. Really? Just a second. Okay, yeah, it does. All right. I want to just do a Bible word study on a word. Okay? Independent of starting with a text, I want to do a Bible word study on the word ergon. It's the word work in James. So how do I get a Greek word into this study in order to do that going direct? You could switch your keyboard and type in Greek, which ultimately you'll learn to do, and it works pretty fast. But if you want to type a Greek word, you hit the lowercase g, you hit a colon, so G colon, and you start to transliterate the word, E-R-G. And that's going to bring up a whole list of Greek words that start with E-R-G, transliterated. And you'll notice ergon is the last one in the list. Just click on ergon. And now it generated that word study on the Greek word ergon. I didn't have to know how to do the breathings. I didn't have to know how to do the accent. I could just choose it from the list. All right? Now, the reason I wanted to do this is to demonstrate. Look at the senses section. Mine has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to start with and a more button. If I click on more, well, there was just one more. So according to the people at Logos, there are 6 senses in which the word ergon can be used. All right? Now, this is dealing with the entire New Testament, right? I mean, we haven't narrowed anything down. This is how this works throughout the whole New Testament. But what if I wanted to narrow this down to James? I know that James is ergon is a keyword in James, and I want to look at just how it functions in James. Notice at the top of the Bible word study, it says all passages. Click on that. Now yours probably doesn't have James in the list because you haven't done it before. So new reference range, type James. Range title, type the word James, and hit save. I don't need to do all that because James is in my list. So I'm just going to click James. Now this whole Bible word study is only dealing with how ergon is used in the book of James. Notice the translation ring, how ergon is translated. It's translated as works, it's translated as deeds, it's translated as result, it's translated as effectual in the New American Standard. And if I go down to senses,
Mine didn't change. Oh,
it didn't narrow the sense section to James. Did it for you guys?
No,
it didn't.
It seems weird. Look how the number says 71 of 12. See, it's like it's not.
Yeah, something went
Like it
goofy
should have
when
narrowed
we
it down
did
to
that.
12, but it didn't.
71 times of 12.
Yeah, they all say of 12, so I assume
It means a lot.
Well, the
I'm
reason
under
it,
the
here's what's happening, and this is a bug in 6 apparently. The reason it says of 12 is look at the translation range. How many times is ergon used in James?
12.
12. So it knows that in the senses lexicon, but it's not filtering out the number of occurrences from the New Testament. So they've got a bug that says 71 of 12. What's happening is it's not narrowing it down to James. It took the total number of occurrences in James, but it's not filtering out. This used to work fine, so this is a bug that I'll report, and hopefully they'll get it solved quickly, because this is really helpful to you in doing your word studies if it just narrows down the senses. But like I said, this Bible sense lexicon is kind of new, and they're really still working on it, but this is clearly a bug. So I can't show you what I was going to show you. But the translation ring will help you with ergon. This is the 12 occurrences of ergon. Now, as you go through, it's translated works a number of times, mostly in chapter 2. But notice 3:13. He will show by his good behavior his deeds. That's still ergon in the gentleness of wisdom. Look at 1:4. Let endurance have its perfect result. Well, that's ergon, work. Let endurance have its perfect work. And then 1:25, but one who looks intently at the perfect law, the law of liberty, and abides by it, not having become a forgetful hearer, but a doer of work, is what that should be. So you can narrow this down in order to find how many times the word occurs in your book. The sense lexicon won't be as helpful as it should be, but the rest of it should be. The other thing is look at root and click more. Look at how many Greek words have the share a root with ergon. Now, think this through for a second. So if you want to follow this root throughout James, what are you going to have to search for? All these lemmas, right? Don't you need to find out if any of these lemmas, if they all come from the root ergon, don't you need to see if any of these lemmas show up in James, right? And so I'll show you how to do that. Now notice, it's showing you which lemmas do occur in James. It has filtered this down to ergon occurs 12 times. But look, ergazomai occurs twice in James. Energeo occurs once. Ergates occurs once. Katergazomai occurs once. And synergeo occurs once. So I now, from this root section, know all of the roots that occur in the book of James. Now I wish it would get rid of all the zeros. There's not a get rid of all the zeros. But you now know what roots are occurring in James, and you could do Bible word studies on each one and find out where they occur. You follow? So your job was, where does James use the word ergon? And all of the other words associated with ergon. Make sense? You guys are staring blankly at your computer screens, and I have no idea if you're getting any of this. It's one of the reasons why I'm saying, do you follow every 30 seconds?
Definitely getting it, just trying to memorize everything.
It's a lot. No, I get that. And I'm going to show you other ways to do some of this that will be simpler. I just want you to get a sense of why we're doing what we're doing here a little bit. We'll reinforce as we go through with other ways and other methods to do this that in some ways may be easier. I just want to show you what's contained in these reports if you dig into these reports.
We could probably do this after class, but next to your root, you've got NASB 95. Okay, I don't. Now, my core Bible is NASB 95.
Okay, go to your settings.
On root?
Yeah.
I can't. Settings doesn't come up.
Even if you mouse over in that direction? Huh.
And because I'm getting 3 more,
Right, you're getting, because you're searching a different translation.
yeah, and the settings isn't coming up on the root.
Are you still indexing? Do you have an icon up in your menu bar of Logos that's still indexing? Okay. After class, in the command box up here, right up here, type the words rebuild Bible index.
Okay.
Sometime after class, and let's see if that fixes your problem.
Okay.
Yes?
Do you have to go through each one of these and make sure you have the same book, version to translate?
No, once you set your core translation, as long as you don't go in and mess with them, they're all going to default to your New American Standard.
Okay.
So if you're going to work from the ESV, for example, go back to the home page, set your preferred Bible to the ESV, and it all should default to that.
Okay.
Now, if you start changing these individually, yes, you need to make sure that they're all the same. But if you choose default Bible, it's going to be whatever your preferred Bible was. Okay? All right. So that's the basics of Bible word study. Preposition phrases is different too, and it's gotten a result, so I'll show you one of those. And then textual searches. So we've basically covered all of the basics of passage guide, exegetical guide, and Bible word study guide, right? You follow? And how did we generate this entire layout with all of these panels and everything? Homepage Bible study. Go to the homepage, type in a verse, hit go. It's going to generate all this stuff. Okay? Now, to get you started with how to mess with some of this stuff, go up to the command box.
Just real brief,
Yes?
what would have happened if we would have typed in just the word work there instead of word?
Probably would have done an English word study. So let's do that for just a second. I'm going to type the word work and hit go. Now what you're doing is you've looked for the word work in the New American Standard. So it's going to say, okay, there's times when the word work translate ergon, but it would also show you other Greek words that were translated the same way. So you're doing the study from the English back to the original language instead of starting in the original language. Does that make sense? I'm trying to think of a word. Help me off the top of my head, Bob. I'm trying to think of a word in English that's got multiple Greek words.
Well, just in case I didn't know the Greek word to type it in.
Right, yeah.
Love. Somebody said
Well, yeah. Just type the word love.
Word.
Make sure that it's all passages, not just James. And now go to Greek words. These are all the different Greek words that are translated love. Agapao is translated 103 times of the 226 occurrences of the English word love. It's translating the word agapao. But you also have phileo. So 18 times of the 226 occurrences of the English word love, it's actually translating the Greek word phileo. That's the danger of starting with the English and going backwards. But this is the power of this if you want to say, okay, the word joy. What Greek words are being translated in my English text as joy? Are there multiple ones, or is there just one? And this translation ring will show you all of that. And you'll notice you've got a number of different searches. Hebrew. These are all the Hebrew words that are being translated in the Old Testament by the English word love. There are a number of different ones. And the English word love occurs 229 times in the Old Testament, but it looks like there are a number of different words that are being translated, a number of different Hebrew words that are being translated by the English word love. And so you could explore that from these translation rings. All right. In your command box at the top, type close all and hit enter. Now what's going to happen is most likely it's going to close all those windows and it's going to take you back to your home page, right? Now, I'm going to show you how to keep from always going back to your home page, because there's times when you don't want to go back to the home page. So under Tools, go to Program Settings, and the very first one at the top under General says at Startup, Open to, and you have all of these choices. I want you to choose Most Recent Layout Any. Now, below this line are workspaces that I've created. You're not going to have anything down there, but Basic Class, Basic Layout Class, Basic with Lexicon, those are all workspaces I've created, mostly in class to demo how to make workspaces. But those, the reason you don't have those is because you haven't made any workspaces yet. But let's just set this to Most Recent Layout Any. And then close that window. All right? Now, in your command box, just type NASB. And you should have in the list, Open New American Standard Bible, and click on it. It should take you to a panel with just your New American Standard open, right? Now watch what happens when I say close all. It closed all the windows, but it left me in a blank workspace. Okay? Right now, I'm at a blank workspace, and I can do whatever I want with it. And I want to show you how to make your own workspaces. We're going to do a couple of basic ones, and then we should be able to do a couple of basic ones here before class finishes, and then you can play with doing some more elaborate ones. So, a basic workspace may be a Bible, a commentary, and another window for something. So let's start with the Bible. Let's open our New American Standard. So type NASB and open your New American Standard. And then let's open a commentary. Let's just type the word commentary. And wasn't expecting it to give me a Greek commentary. Do this. Type New Bible Commentary, NBC. Everybody should have the New Bible Commentary, I think. Does everybody have it? If you just type NBC at the top, does it show Open the New Bible Commentary? Or does it not? You don't have it. Try Bible Knowledge Commentary. BKC.
Yes.
Everybody have the Bible Knowledge Commentary? All right. So type BKC, and then where it says Open Bible Knowledge Commentary, click. And so now I have two panels. I have a Bible panel, and I have a commentary panel. Now right now, if I go to my Bible and I go to the reference box, this Bible reference box that's right on top, and I type in 1 Peter 1:1, because I'm going to do some study in 1 Peter. My Bible went to 1 Peter 1:1. Where did my commentary go? Stayed up there. So these panels are not linked together. The first thing we want to do is link them together. So in the reference menu, the reference panel menu, upper left-hand corner of either box, doesn't matter where you start, but if you click on it, you'll notice we have all of this information. We're going to go over all of it. But for right now, what I'm concerned about is link set. Where it says link set, just click A. And then do the same thing to your commentary panel. Go over to the reference panel menu, link set A. Now, most likely, as soon as you did that, your commentary jumped to 1 Peter 1:1. Now, in either one, I don't care which one, you can start in your commentary or you can start in your Bible. Type Romans 1:1. And your commentary will go with you. If you go in your commentary to Colossians 1:1, The commentary is going to jump in the panel, and your Bible's going to jump. These two are now linked together, and wherever you take one, the other one's going to go. Okay? So, make yours go to Colossians 1:1. Because I'm going to point out a problem with layouts that we've had already.
You say these two are linked together. Do you mean this book and the New American Standard, or you mean just these tabs right now?
Just these panels, just these tabs right now. They're not.
So every time you would, you say get back on Logos, you want to do this, you have to relink it?
No, we can save this workspace. We're gonna see how to do that. For example, since we did this, let's go ahead and save this. Right up in the upper right-hand column on your menu bar, you have Layouts. Click on Layout, and you should have Save as Named Layout. Do you see it?
Mm-hmm.
Click on that and type Class Layout. And hit Enter. You'll now see that Class Layout should appear in the left-hand side column with a check mark next to it. If it doesn't, you got to close the layout panel and then reopen it. It'll show up then. That's been kind of a bug for a long time, but it's working on mine now, where as soon as you save it, it shows up. And then just click off of that layout panel, and now watch what happens. Go up to your command box, type Close All. Now go to your layouts and select Class Layout. It reopened the two resources that you had open, and they're still linked together. That's the essence of how you create workspaces.
Now, every time you open this from this point on, will it go back to Colossians 1 verse 1?
Yes, because that's where you saved it. Okay? So when you saved the workspace, it was at Colossians 1:1. That's the way it'll save. Now, you can go back up. If we change this to 1 Peter 1:1, I can go back up to Layout, and you'll see where it says Update Active. If I click Update Active, I've said save my current one under the same name. So since I just updated the active layout, now every time I launch that layout, it's going to go to 1 Peter 1:1. So if you want to save this layout between sessions, just go to Update Active, and when you come back to that layout, it'll be where you left it. But right now, if I quit Logos completely, and don't do it because it takes too long to restart Logos, and we only have 4 minutes left. But if I quit Logos right now, if I just went up here and said Logos quit, the next time I launch Logos, since I said start up to Workspace Any, it's going to start up looking just like this, just like I left it. Okay? Whatever I was doing, whatever search windows are open, whatever dictionaries are, I could have 50 windows here. If I quit Logos like that, from now on, it won't open to the home page. It'll open to this layout. Make sense? All right. So these two things are joined together, but there's a problem here. Let's go back to Colossians 1:1. And I'm looking at this commentary on Colossians 1:1, and I'm thinking, okay, this is cool. He says that he was not one of the 12 apostles who were with Christ from the beginning of his earthly ministry. Acts 1:22, and I click on Acts 1:22. What just happened?
Moved them both.
So you
Why?
Have to unlink it?
Huh?
They're linked.
Unlink it?
No, you don't have to unlink it. But this is a problem, isn't it? I was studying Colossians, not Acts 1:22. Now, not only did my Bible move, but so did my commentary. I'm not even looking at the same commentary set up before. So what we need to do is we need to create another window we need to create a second Bible window. So if you go to the reference panel menu and say copy this panel to a new tab. Do you see it down at the bottom? It's going to create a second New American Standard window. Second tab. And now I'm going to grab this tab and I'm going to drag it down so that it's only about half of that column. I could even put it as the bottom half of my commentary column. Stick with me here for just a second. In this second window that I created, you'll notice it does not have a link set. But I want to click on the resource panel there and say, send hyperlinks here. When I do that, now instead of a link set A, it has a little target. And what you just told it is anytime I click on a hyperlink, send the hyperlink here instead of the main Bible window. So if I use my back button and I go back to Colossians 1:1, now when I click on Acts 1:22, it sends this panel to Acts 1:22, but it doesn't mess with my Colossians or my commentary. So now I can go to 1 Corinthians 9:1. It sends this Bible, but doesn't mess with the rest. You follow? So I want to save this. So I'm going to go up, and I'm just going to say Update Active, and it's going to resave this as my new class layout. So I don't have to rebuild those panels and those links and those targets. So that's the basics of creating some layouts. We're going to look at how to create some more elaborate layouts on Monday, or on Tuesday. Okay.
And how do you go back originally to the very home page?
Just click the icon in the upper left-hand corner of the menu of the home, and that's how you can get to your home. But it's not going to force you to go there every time you do something. If you like that functionality, go back to Program Settings and say Start Up at Home Page, and it'll go back to the way it was before.
Michael, you said rebuild Bible
Index.